Have you ever wondered how filmmakers manage to tell such compelling, structured stories about real life? I mean, real life doesn't exactly come with a script, right? Welcome to This Explainer. Today, we're putting on our professor hats to decode the art of documentary script writing. This is specially designed for our open and distance learning students at the Department of Journalism and Mass Communication, Odisha State Open University, Sambalpur 1, and honestly aspiring filmmakers everywhere. We're going to master exactly how to build a framework for reality.
Okay, let's take a quick look at the agenda. We'll start with the blueprint, then look at expository and observational formats, move on to participatory and reflexive, touch on the performative format, break down the 6 key elements, and finally wrap up with a summary and some key takeaways.
All right, part 1, the blueprint, scripting unscripted reality.
To kick things off, we really have to tackle a common problem in nonfiction storytelling. How exactly do you script reality when real life is completely unscripted? Well, a documentary script is your foundational element, but it is absolutely not a rigid rulebook. Instead, think of it as a flexible, written blueprint. It's a map that guides the narrative, the structure, and the pacing of your film. Because you're dealing with real-world events, this map has to evolve organically during production. You've got to allow for those spontaneous, unscripted moments that make documentaries so incredibly powerful.
The contrast here is actually pretty striking. In a fiction script, you have a totally rigid structure. We're talking exact dialogue, pre-planned actions, the actors say exactly what's locked on the page, and the director executes that specific vision. But our documentary blueprint, it just gives us the clarity, coherence, and direction we need to capture unpredictability. It tells us where to look, what questions to ask, and how we want the story to feel, but definitely not necessarily what we'll find when the cameras actually start rolling.
Moving right along to Section 2, expository and observational formats, which is all about telling versus showing.
Let's crack open the filmmaker's toolkit. These two formats essentially represent the classic cinematic debate, telling an audience about a topic versus simply showing them. The expository format is probably what pops into your head when you imagine a traditional doc. It's fact-driven, it presents a direct argument, and it heavily uses voiceover narration to connect segments and guide a central thesis. But in stark contrast, we have the observational format, often called the fly-on-the-wall approach. Here, you've got minimal filmmaker intervention. You're relying entirely on visual storytelling, just letting real-life events unfold naturally without dictating the action.
Let's see this in action. An expository script for, say, a topic like climate change relies heavily on expert interviews, statistical data, and visual proof to build a really strong case. Meanwhile, an observational script for a film about the daily life of factory workers simply outlines the locations, the individuals, and the activities to be filmed. It leaves vast space for organic, spontaneous moments to just naturally arise. Can you think of a time you watched a nature documentary? That was likely expository, directly explaining the facts to you as you watched the animals.
Section 3 now, participatory and reflexive formats. The filmmaker steps in.
So let's recap for a second. We've looked at directing a factual argument, and we've looked at silently observing reality. But now we're shifting to formats where the creator stops hiding behind the camera and actually becomes part of the equation. I really want you to think about this. How does the whole dynamic change when the person making the documentary stops observing quietly and actually starts interacting with the subjects on screen? How does that alter the truth of the scene?
Well, it changes things dramatically, and it gives us 2 new formats. The participatory format is where the filmmaker actively engages with the subjects. The script here actually plans out interview prompts, discussion points, and targeted interactions. Then we have the reflexive format, which takes things a step further into a self-aware meta-narrative. A reflexive script explores the filmmaking process itself. It acknowledges biases, constructed reality, and ethical dilemmas, and it actively invites the viewer to question the reliability of what they're actually watching.
So the crucial point to remember here is that a participatory script puts you right in the action. Imagine planning out moments to engage with people at a political protest just to capture those raw emotional responses. A reflexive script, on the other hand, might feature a sequence where the filmmaker openly discusses the ethical choices behind filming that exact same protest. It blurs the line between the observer and the storyteller, making the actual process of making the film a core part of the film's story.
All right, Section 4, the performative format, deeply personal storytelling.
Moving right along, our final format takes subjective storytelling to its absolute peak. If you want to tell a story where your own feelings are the main subject, this is the format for you, no question. A performative documentary is deeply personal.
Unlike traditional documentaries that prioritize objective facts, this format emphasizes the filmmaker's own emotions, reflections, and experiences. It acts almost like a visual diary or a deeply reflective personal essay.
In a performative script, the pacing and visual tone are meticulously planned to align with an emotional arc. For example, if a filmmaker is documenting their own mental health journey, the script would plan intimate voiceovers revealing their inner thoughts, paired with evocative visuals that depict personal struggle and healing. The overarching goal here isn't just to inform you, it's to create a profound, almost visceral emotional connection with the audience.
Section 5. The 6 key elements. Building your script blueprint.
Now that we understand the diverse formats available in our toolkit, expository, observational, participatory, reflexive, and performative, how do we actually build a complete blueprint? Well, regardless of the format you choose, you need these 6 key elements. Step 1 is the introduction, where you set the stage, the subject, and the overall tone. Step 2 is narrative flow, crafting a clear progression of ideas. Step 3 involves planning thoughtful interviews and testimonies. Step 4 is absolutely critical, visual and audio cues. Remember, this is a film, folks, so write down those camera angles and the sound design. Step 5 is pacing and timing, which is all about balancing slower, reflective moments with action-driven sequences. And finally, Step 6 is the conclusion, where you summarize key points and leave the audience with a really thought-provoking takeaway.
And that brings us to Section 6, Summary and Key Takeaways, wrapping up the masterclass. To wrap up this explainer for our ODL students and aspiring filmmakers everywhere, here is your roadmap for success with 5 essential takeaways. First, remember that documentary scripts are flexible maps, not rigid rules. They absolutely must leave room for real-life unpredictability. Second, expository scripts argue facts, while observational scripts quietly capture raw reality. Third, participatory scripts are built around the filmmaker's direct interaction with the subject. Fourth, reflexive scripts look inward, questioning the documentary process itself. And finally, performative scripts focus on deeply personal, emotional arcs, blending the creator's voice directly with the subject matter.
I want to leave you with this final, provocative thought to motivate your continued learning. Since you now hold the blueprint, how will you use these formats to guide your audience through the unscripted world? Because every single choice you make, from the format to the pacing, completely changes the story. So keep exploring, keep learning, and start mapping out your own realities. Thank you so much for joining me in this explainer.